Well, welcome everyone. I am Sophia Merrick. I was born in Northampton in 1818, and I moved here to Springfield in 1850 with my husband Solomon and our one-year-old William. I'm most well known for my contributions as a voluntary Civil War nurse. So the American Civil War lasted 4 long years, as we know, from April 1861 to April 1865. And I was one of 2 voluntary nurses to serve in the 10th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. This was an infantry that was formed here in Springfield in June of 1861, and it was composed mostly of Western Massachusetts men. The infantry grew to be 1,218 soldiers over the war. I got involved in September of 1861. The typhoid fever was rampant in our regiment's camp in Brightwood. Myself and fellow nurse Miss Helen Walcott from Agawam joined the regiment at Brightwood. We joined during the height of that epidemic. During the war, our regiment lost 190 men, about a third of them to disease, and the remainder to battle and wounds. Myself, I also succumbed to the fever and had to return back to Springfield, and my trusty fellow nurse, Helen Walcott, came along with me and also ensured that I recovered from that fever. So let me tell you a bit about my family. Well, first, actually, let me show you myself and Helen. I brought this book out. It was published in 1909 about the infantry that I served in, the 10th Massachusetts. And you can see in this photo a picture of myself and Helen Walcott along with the surgeon, assistant surgeon, and the hospital steward. I'm going to pass this around so you can get a close-up look. And about my family. So I mentioned that I grew up in Northampton, and I also married in Northampton in 1848 to Solomon Merrick. He was born in Springfield, raised in Springfield, and died in Springfield. His first wife, Henrietta Merrick, over to my left here, she was his first wife. She died at the age of 29 after only 3 years of marriage to Solomon of consumption. And just 3 years later, Merrick and myself also married. And a year after our marriage, I gave him his first and only child, our son William. In 1850, a year later after William's birth, we did move to Springfield. And although Solomon already had a home in Springfield, now known as the Merrick House, for some of you who may know where that's located. He did build us an entirely new home on Maple Street where you entered in through the cemetery. And that home we moved in 1850. Unfortunately, however, my dear Solomon also only was living there for 2 years. He died at the age of 45 of bronchitis. But you might be wondering, how did we become so wealthy that we could afford such a large home on Maple Street, one of the most prestigious streets and thoroughways in Springfield? Well, my husband Solomon was very clever. He was a tool manufacturer and he invented many tools, but the most known is the monkey wrench. So, many of you, raise your hand if you own a monkey wrench. Most of the households visiting today. I will pass these around. These are 2 early examples of his monkey wrench that was patented in 1835. These are quite large, probably not the type you have in your household. These were used on the railroad, which was quite a bustling industry at that time. I'll pass one around on this side. And if you look closely on both of these, you'll see the marking of Bemis and Call, Springfield, Massachusetts on the head here. He sold his patent to the Bemis and Call tool and hardware and tool company, and this became their most popular tool and product.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So, I told you a bit about Solomon. I'd like to tell you a bit about William, our son. His father did die when he was 3 years old. And then I myself, when I volunteered in the Civil War, he was 12 years old. So he saw quite a bit in his youth. He saw especially a lot to deal with death, and he was growing up during a very angsty period in this country's history. But I'm very proud of William's legacy as well. He was a Harvard man, and though he never married, he was the treasurer of the Springfield Gas Light Company, and he was the director of the John Hancock Bank. He unfortunately died only 9 years after myself, at the age of 37, quite unexpectedly, in fact. But when he passed, he did bequeath around $98,000 to what is now Bay State Medical Center for the founding of the surgery building, which for the first time separated those with infectious diseases from those with open wounds. And I like to think he might have been thinking of me when he made that bequest. Speaking of family, I want to tell you about my early New England heritage. My family first immigrated to the United States in 1630 aboard the Mary and John. My fourth great grandparents, they traveled on that ship for 70 days with their 4 children and 134 other passengers to make it to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, only 2 years after the colony was founded. And more of my family came in 1634 on the Francis from Ipswich, England, to Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they made their way over to Springfield in 1639. That was 3 years after Springfield was founded. So we were here in Springfield quite early in our family's history. So I told you about Henrietta, Solomon, myself of course, and William, and here at my feet lie my parents, Cephas and Sophia, a Brookfield girl herself, right here to lay in eternity with me. My family and I want to thank you for stopping by our plots today and to honor our contributions.
Welcome to Springfield Cemetery. My name is John Howell. I was born in England in 1823, and I trained as a carpenter. However, carpentry wasn't my main passion. I wanted to be in the military. So in 1846, I enlisted. I was in the 4th Dragoons of the 11th Hussars. You may know them better as the Light Brigade, as in half a league, half a league, half a league onward, into the Valley of Death rode the 600. My service in the cavalry was relatively uneventful until 1853, when England went to war with Russia over a land dispute in Crimea, which my understanding is hasn't been fully resolved yet. So we were deployed there, and then in 1854 we were laying siege to the city of Sevastopol, and on October 25th of 1854 was the Battle of Balaclava. And during that battle, there was some sort of communication mix-up. We're not entirely sure what, but my brigade was given orders to basically give a frontal assault of the heavily defended Russian artillery positions. We were a light cavalry, which meant that we carried things like lances and sabers, and we were generally very mobile. We could skirmish quickly. We could harass retreating infantry soldiers, things like that. We were not intended for full frontal assaults against heavily fortified positions, but that's what we were ordered to do, and that's exactly what we did. And as Alfred Lord Tennyson later immortalized it in his poem, we charged directly into the Russian defenses. And as I later told a Springfield Republican reporter about my entirely true story, we all knew there were masked batteries there, of course, but there were hundreds more than we suspected. No, it was not half a league that we rode. It was about 3/4 of a mile and back again, but there were only 150 of us when we got back. Horses and men were torn to pieces by the grape and canister and piled up in great bloody heaps. But most of our boys who came out were safe and sound. I hadn't a scratch on me. When a man did get hit, you see, it was all up with him. There they were all the way, horses and men piled up like a lot of stones. They had us completely flanked with guns in the brush on both sides all the way, and they raked us in front too. We were just as helpless as a row of chickens on a fence rail. But I made it through without a scratch, and without any record of my service in that brigade, but that's okay. So then, about a little over a week later, I was in yet another battle, the Battle of Inkerman, and I was in several more battles over the course of the Crimean War, and eventually England won, and we were sent back to England in 1857. But rather than resuming the carpenter's trade in London, I decided to head to America. So I came to America and I settled in Worcester. And I picked up the carpentry business there for a few years, but then my new country and my new president, Abraham Lincoln, needed my services again. And I was happy, just as I charged down the mouths of the Russian cannons, I figured a few Confederates down south couldn't be that much trouble. I'll show them what a real war looks like. And so I enlisted. I was in the 6th Massachusetts, which was out of Worcester. And we were among the first to be sent down to the south. And along the way, we encountered some trouble in Baltimore. There were a large number of Confederate sympathizers in Baltimore, and they attempted to stop us from advancing further south. So there were riots, there were mostly civilians involved, but there were people killed on both sides, including several from the 6th Massachusetts. And we were the first Union regiment to receive fatalities from enemy fire during the Civil War. I, of course, was not wounded. And after 3 months of my enlistment, because it was a 90-day enlistment, so after 3 months, I was discharged and went back to Worcester, but not for long. So I was discharged in July, and then by October I was re-enlisting, and this time in the 25th Massachusetts, which you can look that one up. I was in the 25th Massachusetts. And I fought in 30 battles during the Civil War total. I was at Roanoke, I was at Kingston, I was even at Cold Harbor. And let me tell you, as someone who was in the Light Brigade, Cold Harbor felt like that all over again, with a charge up enemy lines, a fruitless effort to try to take their position. Overall, during the Civil War, I was shot a number of times. I had 3 bullets that are still in my right ankle. My back of my neck was grazed by an artillery shell. But overall, I made it through, not unscathed, but good enough. So I came back to Worcester, but then after a little while decided to come to Springfield. My wife Jane and I, we settled in what was at the time the outskirts of the city. We were at the corner of Carew and St. James. We had a little home there. And anyone who stopped by, any visitors, I was happy to regale them with tales of the Crimean War and the Civil War. Some of the people who stopped by, Bishop O'Reilly, I wasn't Catholic, but Bishop O'Reilly and I went way back to our younger days in Worcester, so he would stop by and chat. Libby Custer, General Custer's as in The Last Stand, his widow, she would stop by and visit. So we had a wonderful retirement in Springfield, and then I died on December 20th, 1898, and my wife Jane died just 4 days later. But a little bit before my death, I did try to get into the action one more time, because America was again at war in 1898, this time with Spain. And so a few months before my death, I offered my services to the recruiting officer, who very respectfully declined my offer. I was 74 years young, but he said that I had been sufficiently perforated for one lifetime on account of my Civil War wounds. and it was probably for the best in the end. But it would have been great to go out in a blaze of glory on the battlefield. So thank you for joining me, and I hope that you enjoy your time here at Springfield Cemetery.
I'm James Barnes. I was born in Boston in 1802. After I graduated from the Boston Latin School, by the good offices of Senator Daniel Webster, I was awarded an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. I graduated with the famous class of 1829, along with Robert E. Lee, Joseph E. Johnston, and Albert G. Blanchard of Charlestown, Massachusetts. I placed 5th in a class of 46 cadets. I was commissioned a lieutenant, and I took part in the Black Hawk expedition and was also stationed at Charleston Harbor and at Fort McHenry. But I returned to the academy to teach French.
I am Charlotte Adams Barnes. Sanford Barnes. I was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia in 1808. Like 3 of my sisters, I married a military man. James and I were married in 1832 in West Point, New York, where James was an instructor in French and tactics at the academy. James and I had 2 children before 1836. That was when he resigned his Army commission. West Point graduates were engineers and much in demand by the railway companies. James worked for the Western Railroad, later the Boston and Albany. That's when we came to Springfield. My sister Irene was first married to an Army surgeon, Dr. John Emerson. After his early death, Irene stayed with us in Springfield, where she met and married Calvin Chafee.
After more than 20 years as a civilian, I was well settled with my wife and family in Springfield. We lived on Maple Street and were congregants at Christ Church, with one of the $60 per year pews in the front of the church. Then in 1861, my country called me back to service in the Army. In July of that year, I was commissioned a colonel in the 18th Massachusetts Infantry.
James's regiment joined the Army of the Potomac during the Peninsula Campaign, but saw no combat. Praise the Lord. He was also at the bloody battle at Antietam and remained out of action.
In December of 1862, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, I was fully involved in the action. In April of 1863, I was promoted to Brigadier General of Volunteers. At Chancellorsville, my division commander fell ill, and I assumed command.
At the Battle of Gettysburg in July of that year, James was 61 years old. He was the second oldest of any of the Union generals present that day. During that battle, James received a wound in his leg, which would follow him for the rest of his days.
I spent the remainder of the war on garrison duty. This included commanding the prisoner of war camp at Point Lookout, Maryland. Upon being mustered out of service in 1866, I was confirmed as a brevet major general.
After the war, James returned to the railroads. He served as a member of the Government Commission building the Transcontinental Railroad.
In 1868, my son John, an Annapolis graduate, accompanied me on an inspection tour of the Union Pacific Line as far as Cheyenne. I did not live to see the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, Utah. I died a few months prior, in February 1869, at the age of 67.
James did live to see the wedding of our daughter Emily and Mr. Humphreys at Christ Church. He left me with a comfortable situation, and he provided a generous gift to the building of the new stone Ephesus of Christ Church on Chestnut Street. I continued to live in the house on Maple Street and died in 1875 at the age of 67. We will now sing a hymn sung at our daughter's wedding, Just As I Am.
Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, though tossed about with many a conflict, many a doubt, fightings and fear within, without, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, thy love unknown has broken every barrier down. Now to be thine, yea, thine alone, O Lamb of God, I come, I come.
My name is Marvin Chapin, and I was born in Somers, Connecticut in 1807. I am a descendant of Deacon Samuel Chapin, who was one of the founders of Springfield. Deacon Chapin's descendants have been prominent members of this community ever since. They've owned banks, and one of them even owned the Boston and Albany Railroad Company. My daughter married David Allen Reed, who was the first president of the School for Christian Workers. I think you all call that Springfield College now. Yeah. But this is about me. My most important and successful adventure in life was the development of the Massasoit House Hotel here in Springfield, along with my brother, Ethan. The center of Springfield had been Court Square, where First Church was. It's where the stagecoaches stopped and all social and civic things happened around Court Square. When the railroad came to Springfield and the first train stations were built, that entire focus of town was changed. We saw that this increased traffic would need a quality hotel with great accommodations. Along with Israel Parsons, we bought Judge John Hooker's house and moved it back onto Gridiron Street. We started building our new hotel in 1843. Parsons dropped out, and Ethan and I continued with the construction. We opened and became the most successful and famous hotel to ever grace downtown Springfield. We had three possible names for the hotel when we developed it. One was the Massachusetts, or the United States Hotel, or the Massasoit House. Ethan and I actually preferred the first two names, but there was a barber who was located on the first floor of the hotel, and he started advertising in the Republic that he was located in the Massasoit House. So that stuck, and we took over that name. We were very involved in anti-slavery and Underground Railroad activities. The abolitionist John Brown roomed with us when he first came to Springfield in 1846. John Brown used the Massasoit House as his mail drop and financial fundraising address when he was raising money to prepare for what became Bloody Kansas Expedition and Harper's Ferry raid. We met with him often, and at times we made financial donations to his efforts. The Massasoit House employed many of Springfield's black citizens. This allowed us to openly hide former runaway enslaved people right in plain sight as they worked their way north. Such individuals even served Jefferson Davis, who came to inspect the armory when he was Secretary of War for the United States before the War of the Rebellion. Many other famous people were our guests over the years. I am proud of all that we contributed to the growth and status of Springfield. We expanded often as our needs increased. I'm led to believe that much of the expansion that we did in the 1860s is still there, as well as a fine theater whose entrance replaced the original hotel building. I sure hope these things are being taken care of. Thank you for having me up today. I died in 1899. The Chapin name continues. There are many things throughout Springfield with the Chapin name, and thank you for having me up. It's a pleasure.
So my name is Eli Baptiste. I was born free in Cumberland, Pennsylvania in 1826. I later moved to Springfield, Mass around 1846. I was a pivotal voice in the community, so much so that a Masonic lodge was named after me while I was still living, the Eli Baptiste Springfield Beneficial Society. A pivotal moment in the development of the black community in Springfield was the establishment of the area's first African-American church in 1844. The Sanford Street Church, known as the Free Church, the Zion Methodist, the First Congregational Church, known today as St. John's Church, which you guys have probably heard 500,000 times, but it was very important that, that church and how it changed the area. At the time, John Brown, which we all have heard about him, he came up here and he was a member of the church. He visited us, he talked to us and stuff, and that's when I met him in the church. John Brown leaves Springfield 1849. When he left Springfield after leaving, he had founded the Gileadites, which was a civic group in the city, a civic group. So it was an anti-slavery militia aimed at self-defense against slave catchers in response to the enactment of the Fugitive Slave Act, which made this organization kind of like illegal, right? Because what you were doing is we were going out there, I said we were going out there and we were, protesting in a form by preventing the slave catchers from taking slaves back. Once he founded that group, what you will find out is that at no point in time was anybody brought back from Springfield as a slave. So that was very significant at that time frame. One of the things that's noted in 1855, the census had a population for blacks in the area of 392 in 1855, which is a testament to the Gileadites, which was 10 times the population of all the surrounding towns: Longmeadow, Wilbraham, Westfield, West Springfield. There was census data that showed you and does talk to the number of blacks that lived in those communities and stuff at the time frame. In 1857, I married the love of my life, Laura Sals. She was born in Cuba in 1818. So yes, she was older than me. I thought it was kind of cool. 2 years later, she would pass away. Sad to say. I know. Additionally, in 1859, John Brown would come to his end too. He was actually hung in Cape Town, which was, very touching for us, especially for a person who had such an impact for the residents of Springfield, and helped us establish a group that we were using through his philosophy to go out there and protect the blacks and stuff that were coming into the area. In 1860, you can imagine what it was like to be a black person living in the city of Springfield, well, the area of Springfield, this entire area, because we had businesses, we walked around freely, we actively participated in the community. It wasn't like, it wasn't like the rest of America. What you would notice is at that time is that a lot of blacks would come to Springfield, and the word would travel because of our advanced transportation system, where we would be on the steamboats and we would be the people who would be operating and servicing, and we'd pass the word that way also in addition. When the Civil War broke out, people that lived here who were part of the Gileadites, we all wanted to be a part of it. What we were doing was kind of secret, so nobody really knew us directly unless you lived here. But now we had a chance, because of the Civil War, to actively fight for what we believed in, which wasn't granted to us. We weren't allowed to be in a combat regiment. It wasn't until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 where they would allow blacks to be in a combat service. But we believe in leadership by example. So one of the things that happened is that there was an immigrant to Haiti, and I helped lead that group of people down to Haiti, Dora, Haiti, to establish a colony in Haiti. It didn't work out. What happened was the person who was in charge of the group kind of took the money, and he kind of did what he wanted to do with it. And what happened for us, the ones who did go, the prominent families that went with me, some of them didn't make it. So they were buried in quiet graves. We say quiet graves because, like today, where my grave marker is a non-existence. But they were buried in Haiti, the ones that didn't make it. And we came back in 1864 to New York that June. That's when we came back to the States, and we landed in New York. And then we found our way back here to Springfield, a place that we considered to be home. Right after that, immediately following, within the following year, we would, a lot of the soldiers who were returning after war, they would open up their own businesses, they would open up their own lodges, they would open up restaurants. And one of the most famous restaurants at the time in downtown Springfield, where we love to have food, is Thomas Tom's restaurant. Soldiers would come there like any other diner and talk about past war stories. So we would come there and you would hear like the different battles that they were in at that restaurant. So it was a great meeting spot for a lot of us. That time too, I also opened up my lodge, the Eli Thomas Beneficial Society. It's awesome to think that as an individual, in your lifetime you could have such you could have such a thing bestowed on you to actually have an active lodge named after you. When most people are used to hearing monuments, monuments usually happen after you've passed on. Here I'm living testament that even in my young age at that time, I was able to have such an impact to have that honor, to have that named after me. A year later, I would marry my wife, Elizabeth Parker, and this is the area where her family rests, and we would go on from there with life at that point in time. In 1884, I would actually get a Justice of the Peace Commission, and that's bestowed on you by the governor. So what I'd like to say was done in the dark can be brought to the light, where a lot of the things I did most people wouldn't know about, and it's not as documented. But in order to be considered as a person of character, to be a Justice of the Peace Commission, those are people who perform marriages. There's only so many people who are allowed to actually have that commission, historically speaking, even in today, that you can actually have the commission as a Justice of the Peace. A year later, my wife would pass, and once again I'd be by myself. And then May 26, 1905, it would be my time to go. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Milton Bradley. My ancestor Daniel Bradley of Cripplegate, England, sailed from London on the good ship Elizabeth, settled in Salem, Massachusetts, April 8, 1635. He later removed to Haverhill to help build its first meeting house. My father Louis was born in Vienna, Maine, where I was also born November 8, 1836. I was an only child. After my birth, my father sought work with better prospects and removed from town to town in both Maine and New Hampshire. His most successful venture was to open a mill to extract starch from potatoes. The mill was quite profitable, but in 1845 the potato blight hit and the mill was closed. In 1847 we moved to Lowell, Massachusetts, where my father found steady work at the Merrick mills. When I first started school, I found I did quite well in reading, writing, and drawing, but failed poorly in math and would come home in tears after failing a math test. On one such day, my father sat me down at the table and set down 6 apples and told me to take 2 away and count how many were left. I finally understood. Numbers represented things. My father would play these math games with me, and by high school, I also came to excel in math and science. After I graduated at the age of 15, I was hired by Oliver Cushman, mechanical draftsman and patent agent, and learned the trade. I supplement my income by selling stationary goods to the girls living at the boarding houses at the mills. I would stop by on paydays when they were still flush with cash. I got along so well with the girls that when another salesman came calling, they would refuse him and wait for my next visit. I was able to save up $300, enough for a tuition for a 2-year degree at the Lawrence Scientific School in Cambridge, which later became part of Harvard. As I could not afford board at the school, I commuted to Cambridge daily. At night, I taught drafting to the mechanics working at Merrimack. In the spring of 1856, my parents moved to Hartford, Connecticut for a better job. I chose to go with them as I still could not afford board at the school and dropped out with only 1 semester left. I could not find work in Hartford. And tired of being idle, I took the train upriver to Springfield. I roamed the streets and finding nothing suitable, I made my way back to the station in despair when I spotted the smokestack of a Bemis & Company Locomotive Works on Lyman Street. I entered the shop and asked the superintendent if they were hiring. He said they were looking for a draftsman who could draw a locomotive. I confessed that I never had, but that I thought I could. He must have seen something in me because he hired me anyway. I worked there for 2 years until a recession forced the shop to close. I then decided to open a business of my own on the upper floor of a block on Main Street just over Court Square. I put up a gilt sign. It read Milton Bradley, mechanical draftsman and patent agent. Business went from slow to non-existent. Fortunately, the T.W. Wasson Company remembered the locomotive drawings I had made for them while working at Bemis and contracted me to make the mechanical drawings of a luxurious rail car ordered by the Pasha of Egypt to be constructed entirely of mahogany and rosewood at a cost of $10,000. They were so impressed by my work that they also contracted me to oversee the construction of the rail car. Once the car was completed, they presented me with an elaborate color lithograph of the rail car they had commissioned for advertising. I hung it in my office where I admired it and obsessed over its beauty. I then recalled that my good friend from high school, George Tapley, was working at a bindery in Providence that had lithographs. I contacted him and arranged for a 2-week apprenticeship and purchased their used lithograph and had it shipped to Springfield. It arrived on January 30th, 1860. It was installed in the same room when I first came to work in Springfield at the Bemis Company. The lithographer I hired was a nightmare. The deadline for a large order of prints was looming, and not for the first time he was nowhere to be found. I searched, and I found him sitting in a baggage cart at the depot, quite drunk and proclaiming he had quit. I would have to learn to run the machine on my own. My customer complained about poor quality, and I apologized and promised to do better, and I did. By May, I had so many orders that I had to move my equipment to my largest space on Main Street. I put up a sign to advertise my newly formed company. It read Milton Bradley Company, Publishers, Lithographers. Does anyone recognize the man in this picture?
Yeah. Yes.
That's Abraham Lincoln. Samuel Bowles, the newspaper publisher, convinced me to produce this lithograph of the then presidential candidate. It sold briskly. and in anticipation of an uptick in sales, you can pass it around, I printed off over 1,000 copies. A few days later, a man burst into the shop and demanded a refund. He claimed the likeness was not true. And he was right. Lincoln had grown a beard. My inventory was now worthless, and my business faltered. My good friend George Tapley had been hired by Samuel Bowles to work in his bindery and was now living in Springfield. To cheer me, he invited me over to play some board games. This lifted my spirits and got me thinking about creating a board game of my own. At this time, board games were really based on chance. Players moved in one direction by the roll of the dice. My game would be different. Players would need to think strategically to choose the most advantageous direction to move. My board game resembled a checkerboard. Started in the lower left-hand corner at the infantry square and was won by reaching the happy old age square in the upper right-hand corner and earning 100 points without landing on ruin. I called my game the checkerboard game of life. I ran my lithograph 12 hours a day, 6 days a week until I filled up a trunk, which I then took up to New York City. I trekked from store to store and introduced myself to each proprietor. Hello, sir. I'm Milton Bradley. I have an amazing game that encourages children to lead a highly moral and exemplary life and appeals to young and old alike. May I demonstrate? By the end of the second day, I had emptied my trunk and returned to Springfield with a slew of orders. I sold 40,000 games that first year alone, and it always remained a top seller. After the onset of the Civil War, I was contracted to do drafting work at the Springfield Armory. I noticed the soldiers stationed there were bored stiff waiting around for orders. I came up with the idea for a game kit I called Games for Soldiers. It would easily fit in a knapsack and contain miniature versions of chess, checkers, backgammon, dominoes, and the checkered game of life. It sold for $1. Charities bought these up and would distribute them for free to soldiers across the nation. Around this time, a puzzle called a rebus became popular. Pictures were used to represent words or syllables. For example, the word here would show the letter H, followed by a picture of an ear. I printed the puzzles on the faces of a deck of cards with the answers on the back. I called my card game Modern Hieroglyphics. It sold quite well, and I came up with other games, such as Patriot Heroes, where points were earned for identifying the military men on the faces of a deck of cards, authors for literary titans, curious Bible questions, and Sunday school cards. When jigsaw puzzles became popular, I had a hunch that appealing to boys might help boost sales. I was proven right when my puzzle of a smashed-up locomotive had record sales. One day I was examining some toys I had ordered from Germany, but became fascinated by a toy drum with gaily colored pictures on its side. As I turned the toy around, admiring the artwork, I realized that if put in the right orders, the picture could tell a story. I came up with something I called a Myriopticon. 22 scenes depicting the Civil War were printed on a scroll and mounted on 2 rollers. The scenes were changed by turning the crank, and the story narrated using the book that provided. This novelty proved quite popular, and I received several letters from customers who related that whenever they brought the Myriopticon out, their neighbors would stop by uninvited to see the show. Several times while sitting on my back porch after supper, I was shocked to hear my normally civilized neighbors screaming at each other. It turns out they were playing a yard game called croquet and could not agree on the rules. I then began to research and collect the rules of croquet from both here and abroad. I built my own set and played around with it each evening until I came up with a reasonable set of rules. I took out a patent on April 8th, 1866. The patent included the Bradley official rules of croquet, wooden socket wicket holders, and indexable balls with black or white stripes for use so players could easily tell which balls belonged to their team. The game sold so well that I had trouble getting enough wood for my suppliers, so I opened a lumber mill of my own in West Granville, Vermont. I came up with other versions, a smaller version for children, portable version for travel, and an indoor set for winter practice. My neighbor on Pynchon Street, Professor Edward Wiebe, a German immigrant who made his living giving music lessons to children, would constantly badger me to publish a book he had written based on his experience teaching kindergarten in Germany using the methods of kindergarten founder Frederick Froebel. As the cost would be prohibitive, I always refused him. One day he cornered me as I was leaving my office and announced that Elizabeth Peabody, who had established the first kindergarten in Boston, would be giving a lecture at the Elm Street School. That evening I was mesmerized by Miss Peabody's speech and became a convert. Learning by playing was exactly what had gotten me excited about school. I published the professor's book, which he titled Paradise of Childhood, A Practical Guide to Kindergarten. It was awarded the bronze medal at the Philadelphia Exposition in 1876. One of the principles of kindergarten is the use of materials for children to play with to facilitate learning. I then went on to develop and produce these I then focused on developing these materials. I started with the most basic color. At this time, colors of the same hue were not consistent, even from the same supplier. I devised a color wheel to accurately calibrate the exact mix of hues needed to replicate each color on the spectrum. Colors of the same hue could now be produced for the making of colored paper, paints, and crayons. I wrote several books on the subject, then went on to develop and improve other educational products, such as multiplication sticks, colored pegs, drawing tablets, rulers, compasses, stencils, alphabet and phonetic flashcards, number tablets, fraction discs, and classroom furniture. These educational products were not profitable. I kept the prices low so that the teachers and charities that ran the kindergartens could afford them. The company officers complained bitterly about the ready these products caused. My good friend George Tapley, who now had a thriving business of his own, saved the company by buying them out. He also allowed the company to move into the buildings he owned on Cross and Willow Streets. I turned the directorship over to George, and I took charge of the education division. The adoption of kindergartens was slow. In 1878, there were only 200 nationwide, but by the turn of the century, there were over 3,000. By then, the educational division was turning a healthy profit, and the company had grown so that we now had sales offices in major cities across the nation. My competitors also began selling educational products, and I feared that the original ideals of Frederick Froebel's kindergarten were being lost. To counter this, I purchased a small monthly magazine published in Buffalo called the Kindergarten News. I redesigned the magazine and retitled it the Kindergarten Review. Its circulation spread nationwide and then went international, where it became the official organ of the International Kindergarten Union. Even in my late 60s, I still came to work at the plant every day, but with a later start time. I would take an hour-and-a-half lunch and have the pressing machines turned off so that I could nap. I retired in 1907. On sunny afternoons, I'd like to drive around the city with my wife in my Stanley steamer and wave at my neighbors as we passed by. After one such Saturday drive, I woke up the next morning feeling quite ill. I never recovered. I died 2 days later, May 30th, 1911, at the age of 74. Thank you.